Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. We would really appreciate it if you guys went and reviewed us on Apple or Spotify. Those reviews really help people find the podcast and help it get recognized. And, if you've been enjoying the show, we really appreciate your support. Another thing that you can do to support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eyes On. I'm Andy Milburn, former Marine Infantry and Special Operations Officer, now working for the Team House, and very glad to be hosting this episode with my co-host, Dee Tarkos and Jason Lyons. Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. I'm Jason Lyons, former Marine Corps Infantry and former CIA Staff Operations and Operations Officer. And I really appreciate being here with you guys. Like we've said in the past, this is our three guys sitting around, our take on world affairs as they occur. And just happy to be here. Over to you, Dee, if you have anything.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. Jason, I'm glad you're back on it and your back's feeling better. I have no real credentials at all. I'm just
Come on now.
I'm the
movie producer.
Yeah, podcast producer, but I have no real
former Chippendale dancer.
Yeah, that was my past life.
Renaissance man.
Yeah, that was my passion. Dance was my passion for a couple years there in my youth. But no, I'm happy to do this.
Oh, we digress.
Yeah, I hope everyone likes, subscribes. If you're listening to us on audio, rate and review it. Do whatever you can to help, spread the message of what we're doing. Apolitical, trying to keep it down the line, facts, and I have two experts here that, know what they're talking about. So it's basically a show for me, guys. It's what
Thanks
it is.
Thanks for the overwhelming introduction, Dee.
You're welcome.
Jason, you better step in before Dee totally buries himself.
Well, then I'll end up burying myself, but here we go. So leading off, we on Wednesday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu came out publicly rejecting Hamas's proposal for a ceasefire to the ongoing conflict over there. He flat out rejected the terms of proposal as preposterous, and he basically said that the only thing that will end the war is the complete destruction of Hamas, whatever that means for as far as Israel's concerned. So, according to Reuters, I'm going to read from what the confirmed sources say the document of the proposal read. It says during the first 45-day phase, all Israeli women hostages, males under 19 and the old and sick will be freed in exchange for Palestinian women and children held in Israeli jails. Israel would withdraw troops from Gaza's populated areas. That's phase one. During the second phase, it would not begin until both sides conclude indirect talks over the requirements for ending mutual military operations and restoring complete calm. Obviously, what complete calm means is relative to either side. The second phase would also include the release of remaining male hostages and full Israeli withdrawal from all of Gaza. The remains of any dead would be exchanged during the third phase. And Washington has cast this part of the deal as part of a wider resolution for the Middle East as a whole, conflict as a whole, hoping that there be a reconciliation between Israel and all of its Arab neighbors and the creation of a Palestinian state. Secretary Blinken made a trip, I believe it was Wednesday there as well. So while Israeli has outright rejected it, the U.S. still has hope that there's going to be that this can at least be the cornerstone for a long-term ceasefire and a deal. Other from what I've been reading, other partners in the East or in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia has flat out said that they like the deal, but the only way that they would sign on to it would be the establishment of a two-state
solution.
Yeah, two-state solution. That's the only way that they'll even speak with or entertain entering into relationship with Israel. So I won't say that's a separate thing, but it is a separate thing, and we already know Israel's stance on that. So I think as far as we are concerned, the U.S. is concerned, and everybody, the world is, we need to look at the implications from a 10-foot level all the way up to a 50,000-foot level on what, this means if it's even partially implemented. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, we want the hostages. Everyone wants the hostages returned, and we want there to be we want the shooting to stop. We want innocents to die. Or excuse me, hello, somebody's going to take that and cut it.
That would never happen to anyone on a Team House podcast.
Not at all.
Right? You wouldn't let that happen.
No, I can never see my face being AI'd right now.
Where is Max Blumenthal?
Yeah. We want the innocent. We want no more innocence.
Yeah.
Nobody does. Yeah. So that is if we could have a perfect world right now, that's the biggest and best thing to happen on both sides. Regionally, obviously, we want, as the U.S., I say we as the U.S. would want we want peace in the region for not just those on the ground, the innocents on the ground, but for us as well. We have interests, for better or worse, in the Middle East. And then we've got the peripherals. We've got the Houthis. We've got, Iran, who's got their, finger in the pie, so to speak. So one way or another, along with the positives of a ceasefire and whatever else comes from that, there's the negatives, which is we're going to be pricking at Iran and the Houthis and any kind of extremists in the region. So these are all things we're going to have to take into account.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I mean, this brings out so much, and we're not going to have time to delve into everything here. But just some of the things that you touched upon, Jason, one of which is a recurrent theme, but it's very interesting. It's a very interesting phenomenon that is happening in two countries right now, Ukraine and with Israel, where military commanders are apparently voicing concerns that the stated political objectives are unobtainable. And yet, the political leaders are still holding firm to those objectives that the commanders have told them. We can't get there, boss. In the case of obviously Netanyahu, who by the way realizes that when this is over, he's gone. So I will make no more comments about that. But in his case, destruction of Hamas in very general terms, and his military commanders are asking what exactly does that mean in terms of objectives on the ground, right? And not getting an answer. And in the case, and we'll talk about this, I think you wanted to, Zaluzhny's firing this week. Zaluzhny, by the way, headed up Ukrainian forces. And this is something that's been a long time coming, the gradual disagreements becoming more and more serious as the offensive bogged down in the south and eventually boiling over. But at root cause, fundamentally, the largest difference between Zaluzhny and Zelensky it wasn't in their objectives. They both wanted to evict Russians from Ukrainian soil, but the fact was that Zaluzhny felt that Zelensky was not willing to pay the political price, which was going to general mobilization. Zaluzhny said, we're going to need 500,000 additional troops. All right. Now, the Ukrainian military, I'm sorry, this is a fairly good segue, right? By the way, we'll come back and talk about Israel in great detail for a couple of episodes while I'm out there later this month. But on the topic of Zaluzhny's firing, think about this, because this has this is very interesting. Such a high-tech war right now. The game changer, or the resource that is becoming most critical is not artillery shells right now. It's not even, HIMARS or glide bombs or any weapon system. It is manpower. And I think, I don't want to appear prescient, but back in January, I was saying this. Ukrainians have a military of 800,000. Zelensky is saying they need 500,000, right? That's what he was saying, 500,000.
He wants conscription, right?
Yeah, absolutely, general mobilization. Ukrainians have not gone to that yet. And, one would guess that the only reason not to would be a political reason, that it's kind of it's a very unpopular measure, right? But Zelensky is saying, hey, boss, we cannot get there from here. The offensive has bogged down. For an example, at the height of the offensive, the Ukrainians made 10 miles in 10 days. The very height of the offensive, at the most successful down near Robotyne, when the main effort was pushing. But they bogged down in 20 straight kilometers of Russian defenses. The Russians knew they were coming. And that's where the argument started between Zelensky and Zelensky. Zelensky, under immense pressure, all right, to show gains on the ground to NATO, is saying, hey, you've got to go through it for it. You've got to we've just got to continue conducting these huge attacks. And Zelensky is like, hey man, there's no sign of incoming manpower. And at the rate we're losing people, I cannot afford to do that, or we won't even be able to hold the line, let alone exploit an offensive. Solution is supposedly, his argument all along was that unless they had a large exploitation force, they were not going to be able to take advantage of any of their gains in the offensive, the hard-won gains in breaking through these breaching lines. There's a host of things to talk about here. And again, it's not something, that we can go in a lot of detail right now, but I want to come back to it because there's some really extraordinary things happening in the war in Ukraine that we should take a look at. We've all heard about the rise of unmanned systems, but the scale at which this is happening has to be seen to be believed. And I'll give you an example because it has cultural, it has .MPLF, that is, doctrine through fielding of equipment, implications for the US military. It has cultural implications for the US military. A typical the Ukrainians are finding that the most effective small unit in this type of warfare is 12 to 16 men, roughly size of an infantry squad, larger than the US Army's infantry squad. It doesn't matter the amount of men. What's really significant is that half of these guys are drone operators. All right. Even the local security, flank security, all these things that we learn about in the infantry officer course or whatever, all these things are now being conducted at the tactical level. All these tasks by drones, so you can see the implications here. It's a different type of fella who is really, the sought after dude, even down at that level. What do you think they're doing forward? Point man, right? The point man is using a drone all the time. It's considered suicidal not to do that. All right. Same thing now when they're getting to urban clearing. They're even using FPVs, which is the first-person view drones, which are old previously quadcopter racing drones that have been repurposed in Ukraine. As some of you may have seen the videos, there's some extraordinary videos of these things chasing Russian soldiers, and vehicles under culverts, into bunkers, all kinds of things. When you talk about combined arms in conjunction with artillery, these FPVs are really proving to be a game changer, and down to the squad level. When you look at the Marine Infantry Squad, and I just speak of the Marine Infantry Squad because I was a member of said squad at one stage. It has not changed as far as lethality significantly in the 35 years it has been since PFC Milburn was carrying the saw as a newly fledged member of his fire team. But the Ukrainian squad certainly is, and they've learned hard lessons, but nevertheless, until we can find unmanned systems that can take and hold ground, we're going to need flesh and blood as infantrymen. And that is the problem now facing the Ukrainians. And that was one of the most fundamental reasons between the split between Zelensky and Zelensky. And I think it's sad that he's gone. It is sad. I think we want to see civilian control the military in any Western democracy. So the act itself is encouraging, I suppose. But the fact that it was Zelensky who had such an iconic hold on the Ukrainian soldiers, they loved him. They really did. They sensed
I was going to ask you that if you
yeah,
knew
he was a soldier's
popular.
general.
Okay.
I don't want to draw comparisons, but I will. Montgomery in the Second World War, Montgomery was not necessarily a tactical genius, but he knew his relative strengths and weaknesses between the British Army and the Germans. El Alamein was a triumph of materiel, just stockpiling everything. He was almost an attritional general, but the soldiers loved him because they knew he wasn't going to throw their lives away. And that is how they felt about Zelensky. The word got out that he was stopping these mass assaults without sufficient cover on a transparent battlefield. By the way that we conduct breaching in the U.S. military is pathetic now, has been shown to be pathetic by 20th standards of 21st century warfare. SOSA, for Christ's sake, using outdated methods like smoke generation. The Ukrainians have tried that and we're getting massacred. And that is why Zelensky stepped in, altered the tactics to move tree line by tree line, covered by vehicles, by small unit, making small incremental gains, but at least saving lives, which he knew was going to be critical at this stage of the war.
Andy, I got a question.
Yeah, please do.
Let's say they did mobilize 500,000 troops. Would it make a huge difference in terms of pushing the Russians back?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I would say, I would say, it's a question of scale, right? 500,000 guys. That's now you got to factor in the time lag to get those dudes through the system. The Ukrainians have had to push people through in a matter of a few weeks, before these guys they're barely trained in many units. Most units was our judgment, most our group even a year ago. But even then, it's going to take a while to integrate and assimilate these guys. But yeah, sure, that's a significant force. And here's the other part of this: the Russians, as far as personnel, are on the ropes too. They went to general mobilization, or not even general mobilization, partial mobilization over a year ago to raise 300,000 guys. They've lost, in combined attrition more than that since then. So they too are fielding understrength units, and if the Ukrainians can put together this many dudes and replenish the stocks of equipment that they have lost in the offensive, they've got a fighting chance, absolutely. But you've got to remember too that there's many a slip between cup and lip. That's going to take months. You've got NATO's less zealous members already kind of looking at Putin saying maybe we should go to the negotiation table, right? Thank you, Tucker Carlson, by the way, for that interview. Let's jump into that next. Before we do that, I do want to talk about a couple of adaptations that are significant to what's happening now in the Middle East, right? So the Russians have adapted very, very quickly. There's been a lot of news about, the Ukrainians. So the Russians are using all the drones in exactly the same way now, even not quite to the extent the Ukrainians are, but they're also adapting by using a weapon that has become the most feared to Ukrainian infantrymen. The reports, messages I'm getting back from people I still know out there. And that's the glide bomb. All right. So, earlier on in the war, the Russians were dropping dumb bombs and quite ineffectively. They suffered high attrition. And of course, the air war became kind of where it became almost static. I mean, there was no air superiority by either side. Aviation operated behind or up to the front line. It was considered suicidal to operate in front of the front line, right? But so what the Russians have done, particularly with, I mean, all of their aircraft, rather than flying up or across the line, they will lob these things, these glide bombs from behind the lines out of range of Ukrainian ADA systems. All right. And these things have a warhead of between, 200 and 500 kilograms, so significantly more destructive than drones. And they are wreaking havoc. The Russians too are using them almost in swarms with their Lancet loitering munition. I don't know if some of you have been watching the videos maybe about these things. They are the Lancet 2 is a very feared weapon. It's, I mean, as is any loitering munition. I mean, 1 minute everything's fine. Next, you're gone. All right. And there's no warning sign, at least with artillery or small arms or anything else, you get some indication, right? But yeah, these things have a tremendous psychological impact, which is interesting. The Lancet, even though they have a small warhead, and even though they can take out 1 or 2 guys in a small vehicle at a time. So the Russians are adapting fast in this. Now, when I say implications to the Middle East, there's a couple of things. All right. So the Ukrainians have done very well in the Black Sea, and they've been using the kind of Houthi tactics. All right. So there's a message for us here, the downside, but I suppose you'd call it a mosquito fleet. The Ukrainians really do not have a navy worth talking about, but they've got plenty of anti-ship missiles, or rather missiles they've repurposed to be anti-ship missiles. They've got still very capable special operations guys, to include maritime special operations, and they've got a fleet of seaborne drones that are really cutting edge, beyond what we have. And so with those things, plus the loitering munitions of their own, they've been plinking away at the Russian fleet with some success. But the Russians still largely control the Black Sea. And when we're talking about the fight for freedom of movement there, I don't want to suggest the Ukrainians have brought the Russians to a standstill, but it's kind of interesting how they have certainly prevented that freedom of movement. The Russians are unable to impose a blockade, and the Ukrainians, as a result, were able to export, 4.8 million tons of grain last year, which is almost back to their pre-war levels. So again, we should be looking at what's happening in the Black Sea to glean some lessons. What are the Russians? What are the options to counter this type of warfare? The other thing, very quickly, because we're not going to come back to Ukraine in this episode. Who knows what's going to happen next episode? EW, all right, counter drone warfare then has come down to electronic warfare on both sides. All right, the Ukrainians estimate that they lose about 2,000 drones a month to Russian EW. All right, and the Ukrainians have themselves brought in large systems and are reporting that, yeah, these are way more effective than any kinetic solution. So again, some lessons here that we can certainly learn from them. Aside from that, engagements on the ground from between vehicles, this is kind of an interesting point, have been small packets, right? We, U.S. military, we wouldn't dream of sending a tank out without a sister tank, right? I mean, that's, and preferably a platoon, which is 4 tanks. You need your wingman, you have mutual support, blah, blah, blah. Well, the Ukrainians are operating their tanks and Bradleys or IFEs singly. Why is that? Well, it comes back to glide bombs and Lancet, and it comes back to priority of targets. The Russians aren't going to plink a single vehicle and lose an asset. All right, even a Lancet, they might do it with a Lancet, but certainly not a glide bomb. Right, costs a lot of money. So they're waiting for a larger conglomeration, at least a platoon, maybe a company. So the Ukrainians have figured out that if they can work out how to operate alone in conjunction with infantry, lone vehicle, then they're going to be more survival and have more success. Hence, that is why you had this extraordinary story of a Bradley knocking out a T-90, a couple of weeks ago near Divka. So anyway, hey, listen, I've gone on about Ukraine for an amount. Back to you. Anything?
I just got one more thought about Ukraine. I was thinking about Zelensky from a political and / intel standpoint. I had a thought of, given his popularity with his troops, how much of this is this decision to remove him is political because of he may be a political threat. So that's something to think about. And on the outside, on the back half of that, now that if it is political, if part of it is political, which we would assume, any replacement, is this going to be somebody that's going to walk the line, which would down the line compromise tactics and the troops and stuff. So that's something to think about.
No, that's a really good point. Really good point, Jason. I got to tell you that the scuttlebutt in Ukraine is exactly that. Listen, I'm just repeating, the word, and this is why it was a dangerous move to fire this guy. I suppose. I mean, it was. I suppose draw a comparison with MacArthur's firing, but to your point, politics in Ukraine, as you know, is pretty cut and thrust, and that's an understatement, right? I mean, you take no prisoners, and even a guy like Zelensky, ostensibly easygoing, amiable, he wouldn't have got where he is without being able to slit some throats politically, and the popularity certainly of Zelensky could well have annoyed him. They had differences. I mean, there were good reasons to fire him. I mean, Zelensky had a public difference of opinion with him.
Again, like McCarthy.
An interview to The Economist in which Zelensky said, "Hey, the war is a stalemate. We can't get there from here without more resources." Which was a huge departure from his boss. His boss had to walk that back in. So yes, I agree with you, Jason. I think that could well be a motivation, but there were enough reasons ostensibly for the president to blame it on other things legitimately.
Well, can I ask? So Zelensky's he's trying to get more resources out of NATO or the U.S. specifically, probably. Was it like the biggest beef between them was the mobilization, right? He meant more resources in terms of manpower.
I can't pretend to be, in the inner circle, but that's what I'm hearing. That was, that was the root cause.
Yeah.
I mean, Zelensky emerged from the first year of the war as a hero, and he still is regarded as a hero to the troops. I mean, he is, there's no doubt about it. And, I can't believe I used that term. But the last year has been a rough year. First year saw the defensive Kiev. It saw, the Kharkiv breakthrough. It saw retaking Kherson. But there's been definite change in the last year. Ukrainian casualties mount. Ukrainians haven't released their figures, but all estimates are that they were on parity for a while. Both in vehicles and in personnel during the offensive, which of course the Ukrainians cannot. They can't afford to sustain that.
Right. All right. So back to the Middle East, and this is more like Jason's expertise. The U.S. targeted strike on what's the organization's name in Baghdad?
Hezbollah. Hezbollah.
The logistics guy. Was it a CIA drone, Jason? Tell us everything.
Let me close the doors first. I don't know. I would venture an educated guess that that the agency had a hand in it, whether it was on the ground intel or strategic intel on it, but I would think so that we would have had a hand in it. It was the precision of it would suggest that this was something that was in the works for a little while, whether that's 2 weeks or because it was not indiscriminate at all. And
this guy's been wanted for this guy has been, I would just say this guy has been on our
he's been on the post office
checklist.
He's been on the post office wall for a while. Yeah. So
sorry, go on. Just
no, it's all right. And also too, the fact that we knew going into this, before we hit the pickle switch, that we were going to incur the wrath of the Iraqis in this. So, at this point, we're already talking about withdrawing our troops from the coalition anyway. So it's kind of one of those, in my eyes, it's one of those, well, we're going to do it anyway. We're leaving anyway. So we're going to get our licks in before we go. So, I do believe, even on a common sense level, agency or any intel apparatuses would have been at work in the planning and executing of this thing. So hopefully that is a roundabout way of answering your question.
Yeah, it was, he had a strange name. It was like Wissam al-Sadi, but he called himself Abu Bakr. I don't know how he got away with that, but that was his nom de guerre after Big Daddy Abu Bakr. And actually, and he headed up. The media reported variously that he was there. He handled logistics, that he headed up KH operations in Syria. I don't believe he headed up all KH operations in Syria. He was certainly connected with their drone operations. And so you see there may have been a perceived connection between the fact that it was a drone attack on the base, even though the drone came from Iraq. This guy was supposedly an expert in repurposing drones. So we had that, but in these statements, remember, they just made a comment that he was responsible for aggression against U.S. forces or whatever, causing U.S. casualties, not specifically notice the attack on Tower 22.
Yeah.
But, I say all that because, here's the deal. And I've said this before, it's immensely viscerally satisfying to see a bad guy killed, right? On the other hand, one hopes it's part of a larger comprehensive plan. And we said the same thing about Soleimani. And by the way, at the time, I think the more circumspect observers were saying that, hey, listen, it's going to take a while for revenge to happen, but revenge will happen. And it did. Qatar Hezbollah lost Mohandes, and it took 3 years, but they hit Tower 22. There's anyone who thinks there's no connection there is so what I'm saying is we're injecting, it's incredibly, when you look at everything we've been talking about, right, from what's happening in the Middle East to what's happening what's happening in the Middle East holistically, from Gaza to the Red Sea, right? Obviously, it's a wicked problem, to use General Nave's terms. And what we're doing is injecting energy into the system. The Israelis are injecting energy in the system. Iran is, right? And we're all kind of observing, okay, what did that do? Yeah. Well, we should have some predictions about whenever we inject energy into the system, to include whacking someone, a mitigation strategy, just a campaign, so it's part of a larger picture. And that's what I hope is happening. I'm not suggesting that that's not, but there will be repercussions, of course, and even in the kind of information space, we are going to suffer some loss of ground. All right, that's all I'm saying. Okay, before your audience goes crazy saying that I don't support killing, which is, I know, one of the main ethoses of the Team House podcast. But you know, when you talk about information space, it's almost amusing. Of course, the Iraqi military is up in arms about violation of sovereignty. You know, the military spokesman said United States has become a factor for instability and threatens to entangle Iraq in the cycle of conflict. The coalition consistently deviates from the reasons and objectives for its presence on our territory. Right. So just laying the reverse side of the red carpet for us to get out, while the chairman of the PMC meets with the Russian ambassador. The chairman of the PMC is an official Iraqi government position. That happened, as I talked about 2 weeks ago. You see what's happening. All this blood and treasure, we spent all this effort in Iraq, and now we're kind of being eased out, and coming in the back door is Russia. No cost to itself in blood and treasure, and Iran. Don't worry, we'll talk about positive things later, right?
There's another story out there too about the IDF or Mossad hitting on smoking IRGC guys in Syria. There's another report about somebody being poisoned too.
Don't remember that, but yeah, they killed actually 3 IRGC guys in a farm near Damascus, which brings up an interesting point when we talk about, again, and we stay clear of taking sides politically, but politics drives warfare, right? And we talk about our political stance vis-a-vis the Israelis, how we're walking a fine line, and yet, meanwhile, although we say ourselves we didn't kill any IRGC guys in the well-publicized strikes that we do, behind the scenes, almost the Israelis are taking them out one by one in Syria.
Yeah. So like my question is, part of the U.S. strategy, like you've seen it with specifically at the White House briefings, like they're trying to cool some tensions, moving towards a ceasefire, negotiations. Is it part because they need Israel to kind of turn down the volume a little bit? Because like you said, they bring so much energy to the region.
Yeah.
Is that part of the strategy, right? Like to have them like pull back a little bit so this place like kind of calms down a little bit?
Yes, certainly. I mean, we're trying to lower the heat, right? And I mean, the Israelis have an advantage in a sense, in that they almost can do what they want, right? And they know they will ultimately get US backing. Yep. And they're playing to a domestic audience when they do so, right? It's the opposite for us. And we're walking all these fine lines in the Middle East right now, and we're trying to keep the lid on. And as we've seen, there's so many relationships there that don't work in terms of cause and effect anymore. Like the Iranians and their proxies, that it's the unpredictability is off the charts. I mean, you throw in, you name it, you throw in the peripheral activity that is spiking or growing on Israel's northern border with Hezbollah. That's again almost behind the scenes, or the trouble on the West Bank. Discussions about Iranian influence now and infiltrating the West Bank. I mean, these are not comforting signs, right? You don't have to be Chicken Little to be saying, wow, I really feel right now as though we're sitting on a powder keg in the Middle East. Man, that is such a cliche, isn't it? But it really does feel that way right now, and for all of these reasons. Let me see what else on that. I'm just trying to think of anything else on that topic. Oh, hey, so yeah, information space, right? This week, various statements released about our strikes, but KH came out and they basically said, hey, our previous ceasefire is off and there are no US forces that are out of reach of our drones. Basically, it specifically talked about using drones to hit us again. Various and Ashab al-Kaf, another major militia group, Iranian-backed militia group, said, set your clocks for revenge time. Its minutes are missiles, its seconds are drones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you like that? Set your clocks
I could
for
see
revenge
I could
time.
just picture their like strategy session on that statement.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be a pretty cool Christmas present, like
Yeah.
a clock literally with
With
minutes that are
Yeah.
missiles and
yeah.
seconds are drones.
Yeah. And you
Um,
know that the both the initial halting of operations against U.S. troops and then this reinstatement of it is from a tap on the shoulder from Big Brother Iran. I don't think that was a small group decision. I think that was okay. Back off for a few minutes for a little bit, and now it's okay. Go ahead and ramp it up again. We got your back. So
yeah, that's a good point. It's as we talked about last week, the Iran, of course, Iran's stance is disingenuous. It has made these groups capable of doing what they can do. Whether they are now controlled by Iran or not is almost irrelevant. In fact, it's in our interest that they are controlled by Iran,
Yep.
because at least then we have one semi-rational actor to exert pressure on.
Yep.
But our fear is, and the evidence, well, the indicators are that in the case of the Houthis and to a certain extent the PMCs in Iraq, they're beyond. I mean, they're no longer listening
Yep.
to Quds Force and the
And
way
they have the
that
knowledge and training to do it on their own.
And that could be, again, unintended consequences of a strike. Remember, Jason, we talk about strikes and we go through all the other stuff, why it needs to happen now. There's always the, what happens? What are the repercussions? Who replaces this guy, right? And so who replaced Soleimani was a guy named Ghani, we talked about a little bit last week. Different guy. Soleimani was loved by the rank and file, very charismatic. But the militias in Iraq were scared of him. Ghani doesn't exert that kind of control. So part of it may be just natural, kind of move on. The kids have grown up, want to leave the house. Part of it may come down personality, which is all important.
Absolutely.
D, how are we doing on time?
Pretty good. I think we're at like 35-ish, 40 minutes.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Tucker Carlson real quick?
The interview with Putin.
Yeah. All right.
It's a great history lesson of like Putin's view on things. It was wild, that first 30 minutes of shutting down Tucker and being like, no, this is what's going on. And I'll get to that whenever, you know what I mean? He just freaking owned them.
Yeah, let me frame it this way, okay? I'm not, certainly I don't make comments about Mr. Carlson as a person. I don't know him, and I'm sure he has many staunch fans within our audience. But I will say this, that he had a terrific opportunity. Western journalists, we're almost going over time. Richie's got his bone, is making it very evident. But he is the first Western journalist, right, to get in with Putin recently, certainly. All the major networks have been turned down, and he had this prime opportunity to really get in and dig down. What were you thinking? What are you thinking now? Well, instead, he asked a series of softball questions. All right. And he let Putin run off script and didn't bring him back in. He acted like a rookie. He acted like a starstruck rookie. So regardless of, what you think about this politically, blah, 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 I think it was a huge lost opportunity. I mean, I just wish that we'd had someone, or it had been someone of more substance and greater talent than Tucker Carlson. I mean, Christ, for goodness sake, in the first, first minutes of the interview, we're in a lengthy discussion about Rurik, a Varangian chieftain of the 9th century, in the medieval reign of Yaroslav the Wise. I'm thinking, what just happened? We fell through the looking glass, Tucker. Get us back. Yeah. And by the way, that although there may have been some crossover, there may be a reason why they're talking about this guy, because he's kind of a hero of the right wing. Rurik, Doesn't Rurik sound like the guy in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
has to go to the bathroom?
Sounds like
and
a
then
bad
just-
Bond villain.
then just
Rupert.
pees.
That's
yeah,
Rupert.
pees under the table.
Andy, you know what's
Um,
funny? That's a great reference because that used to be one of my favorite movies as a kid.
It's a great movie.
It was
You know?
Rupert.
Well, what was trippy
Rupert,
for
yeah.
me is when he spoke about Poland and World War II,
Yes.
basically
Yeah.
starting World War II. And literally right after that, I turned on YouTube and I was watching something and they were talking about Wagner's footprint in Africa and how it's starting to wane a little bit. And taking over is what Russia has dubbed their Africa Corps. And I was like, oh, okay.
Well, that term sounds so familiar.
Yeah. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, I know that was a great one. Poland started the Second World War by very selfishly being invaded by Germany on 3rd of September 1939.
The interesting part to me was,
and then he claimed, and Jason can talk about this at length, that 2014 in Ukraine was a CIA-backed coup.
Yeah.
By the way, Carlson seemed to not understand the difference that there were there were two revolutions, one in 2004 and 2014, and he got confused between those two. He didn't ask a single question, hardball question, not even about, I don't know, Russian war crimes, including those for which Putin stands personally accused, or the repression of domestic critics, such as, Navalny. And the only thing he came away with was kind of these memories of a 17th century Cossack leader, which Putin, a file of letters, right?
Yeah, that was hilarious. That should be like on a bingo card, like a world leader handing documents over to a journalist. Like, that's the best when that happens. I love it.
But on a serious level, it sounded like Putin was hinting that he still might use nukes.
I think that's going to come up in any interview with him.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, exactly. He said he wasn't interested in invading Poland or Latvia, but of course he'd said the same thing about Ukraine.
Yeah. What I get from Putin, and this is like most of his interviews or statements, is he plays like the victim really well, or at least that's a message he's trying to put across. Like, woe is us. And like, we're just trying to negotiate with the West. Like, we're not doing anything. He did ask him about like if Russia would Russia have joined NATO back in the 90s? He's like, yeah, we would have been open to it. Like, what are we talking about? Yeah. I mean, even though he wasn't running things in the 90s.
One of the challenges for a guy interviewing Putin is he's got this, especially when he's on home turf, very kind of a sneering, supercilious, arrogant attitude that builds a wall between him and the interviewer. And many interviewers, especially Russians, of course, fall into this kind of sycophantic mode. And it's very much Putin is in controls the interview, and this was no exception. Putin showed absolutely no regard for the interest or patience of the viewers, and Tucker didn't bring him back in. Putin's just he's not accustomed to explaining himself, and Carlson didn't make him do it.
And he's an intel guy at heart. He's a spy. So, I mean, look at what he did. I don't remember the year when he brought his dog into the talks with, was it Merkel? I believe it was, knowing that she was terrified of dogs.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Right in between them. Yeah. I mean, he's an intel guy through and through. So
he does. I'll give him credit. He does mention that he is I'm a KGB guy. I work for the main directorate and stuff like that. Like, because he talked some shit about the CIA. He put Carlson in his pocket though. Like at one point when he mentions to Carlson, like, oh yeah, you try to get into the CIA and were rejected. That's interesting.
Well,
like he
knows how to get in your head.
Yeah. Well, here's the point. I mean, he blew it. I'm talking about Carlson. As a professional journalist, he shouldn't be proud of that effort. Power in Russia is absolutely opaque, and it often seems as though the only one man in the know is Putin, and even he seems to be frequently failing.
Yeah.
And so, Carlson's granted this rare access to him, and he blew it. And the message we all got was, again, Putin's it's not to be trusted.
Yeah.
But more importantly, certainly not a guy to emulate or admire as, kind of at least I got the impression from Tucker Carlson. Could be wrong, but that's, which is a shame. So let's see. Well, on that note, D, over to you. Did we miss anything out, man?
No, I think we got everything. Jason, you got anything that you want to touch on, or?
No, I think it's all a matter of, as Andy alluded to earlier, connecting all the dots between everything. Nothing is happening in a vacuum, whether it's Ukraine, Middle East, whatever it is, it's all connected, whether it's for the military tactically, what did we learn? Lessons learned politically, what's going to happen next. I think we just need to keep an eye on it and keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, well, I am going to wrap it up now. And I know D has reminded me to say something. I was desperately trying to remember what he had reminded me to say, but now I know. All right. Hey, everyone. We really, really welcome your support, but kind of tangible proof of it is really what we need. So, even just liking videos or the podcasts, writing a review, all of these things really, really help out. So if you enjoy this, if you kind of enjoy this format, you don't have to like us personally, but please do like the episode, subscribe on whatever platform that you are watching or listening to this, and follow us on social media. And that is pretty much it.
Yep. We'll see you guys again on Wednesday. We're gonna be doing these twice a week because I think the news is evolving so fast that I think it's warranted. And yeah, exactly what Andy said. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, tell your best friend about it. You know what I mean? Like, you're sitting there with your wife and she doesn't want to hear it, but tell her about it anyway. Inundate people. So thanks, guys.
All the best. See you in a couple of days.